Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Daniel Barkowitz, and I am thrilled to welcome you to our presentation today, July 20th. We're going to be talking through the Family FAFSA training. Again, my name is Daniel Barkowitz, and I have the pleasure of being your host today. I am the Assistant Vice President of Financial Aid at the University of Miami. And my role at the University of Miami is to help students at UM prepare and help pay for their costs at UM, but I've worked in the financial aid business for about 35 years at a lot of different kinds of institutions, including some time as director of financial aid at MIT. I was dean of financial aid at Columbia University. I worked at Valencia College in Orlando, Florida. So I have a lot of experience that we're going to share with you. I'm going to share with you today. I'm also joined by a fantastic group of panelists and folks who are behind the scenes helping us out today. First, I want to acknowledge our sponsor and provider, which is the Broward Educational Foundation and Bridge to Life. They're really the organization that's offering this workshop for you today, and we're thrilled to see you here. Thank you for joining us this morning. We're going to spend the next hour and 15 minutes or so going through the FAFSA, making sure you're prepared to complete a FAFSA, talking about a little bit, give you a little bit of background as to sort of why we're doing this and what's going on. And by the end of the day, I'll also give you some information on how to receive, once you do your FAFSA, a $20 Amazon gift card that we will be providing to you as a thank you for completing your FAFSA and getting that done. So again, let's talk a little bit about logistics today. If you do have questions, please feel free to use the question button. If you're new to Zoom, it should be on your button, your ribbon. There should be a button for Q&A. Feel free to ask questions there. We have a panel of financial aid experts who are behind the scenes, who are supporting this wonderful workshop we're providing you today, and they can answer any questions you have. And we will take time to answer your questions as we go through the webinar today. My goal, as I've said, is to really help you understand how to prepare and provide information on the FAFSA and be able to answer the questions. But I want to start with a little bit of background about what is the FAFSA, why FAFSA completion matters, and tell you a little about, and some of you have lived this maybe, about the challenges that we've had this year, why it isn't too late for you to complete a FAFSA. And again, be giving you some information about how to submit your proof of completion and to get your $20 gift card back. So first of all, to remind you sort of why FAFSA matters. FAFSA is the free application for federal student aid. It is the main application the federal government uses. It is free. So that's the important word. No one should have to pay to complete a FAFSA, but it's the main application the federal government uses to determine eligibility for all federal aid programs. What you can see on the chart that I'm sharing with you is that there's a lot of money that's available, and I want to dispel two myths that a lot of families have about the FAFSA. The first one is that it's all loans. The only money I can get by doing the FAFSA is loans. What you can see on the pie chart that I've given you here is that actually 60% of the funding that's available when you complete the FAFSA is actually in the form of grants and scholarships. It's true about a third is in the form of loans, but it's not all, it's not half. It's only about a third of the funding available nationwide. About 5% is tax benefits, and 1% is work awards. You'll also see that the significant portion that is in the grant portion is awarded by institutions. Now, this is institutions like UM or Valencia or UCF or Berkeley or whoever providing a scholarship or a grant to their students to help them afford the costs at their institution. And it's the FAFSA that really gets you started in the application process and gets you access to institution grants, state grants, some private grants, loans, and other varieties of funds. So you have to do the FAFSA to be able to get into the system. What's also important to understand is that seniors graduating from high school are much more likely to attend college immediately if they complete a FAFSA. FAFSA is the single largest predictor in terms of a student's likelihood to attend. So normally, in a normal cycle, if this were a normal year, October 1, the FAFSA would open, and that would be October 1 of a student's senior year in high school, and they'd start completing their applications on October 1st, and they would submit their application. Some students would submit the FAFSA only. Some students might submit the FAFSA and another application or applications, including the CSS profile, or maybe your school has some specific applications for financial aid, but you would submit your applications on or about October 1st. And then the aid offer would be prepared and sent to students with their admission offer. That is what would happen in a normal year. Well, unfortunately, this year was anything but a normal year. And we've been calling it the FAFSA fiasco 2024. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened and why before we dive into the FAFSA itself. So, as a background, there was a rewrite of the entire financial aid system. There were two laws passed by Congress that required the entire financial aid system to be rewritten from the ground up. And that required reprogramming of the entire computer system. And this was originally supposed to be targeted for students entering college in the 23-24 year, but the Department of Education saw how big this project was and asked Congress for a 1 year extension, which was granted. So this year's seniors in high school were the ones who were faced with the brand new FAFSA. And ultimately, the new FAFSA is going to be a better thing for students, but this year had a number of problems. And here are just some of the problems and the issues that students face this year. First of all, remember I said that usually the application opens up on October 1st. This year it didn't open up until 3 months later, which was December 30th. And it only sort of opened up on December 30th. It was open for about an hour on December 30th. Schools and colleges like mine, we didn't get any data. Usually we get data from the FAFSA immediately. As soon as you do your form, it turns around, it gets sent to us at the colleges. We didn't get data until mid-March. And you can see there are a number of other errors, including badly written questions and errors with the IRS matching that really hampered us this year. So if you're a person who faced these errors or concerns, I'm going to talk about how do you prepare for that this year. What can you do to make sure that we're going to, again, today, highlight those poorly written questions for you, show you how to answer them, and provide some information about that as we go through the application process. So the net effect, by the way, is that applications have been received very, very low. So this is the most updated information nationwide. About less than half of the high school graduating class has actually been able to complete a FAFSA so far this year. That compares to over half from the year before. You can see the orange bar versus the blue bar, and we're about 11% behind. Now, I am curious if you're willing, if you can type in the chat, where are you from? What state or what city are you coming in from today? Because I will say the impact has been different based on the individual state. Some states have had better response rates than others. In the state of Florida, where we are located, we are actually at the 48th highest rate or lowest rate. We're close to the lowest in terms of completion rates in the country. You can see that for our high school seniors, it's only about a third of high school seniors who have actually been able to complete the FAFSA at this point. So that is part of the reason why we're offering this benefit, this opportunity is to really help convince families and students to complete their FAFSA. And you can see actually the one good news is we are making progress against last year's benchmark. We are only 12% down. That's still a significant number. We were at a much lower rate or a higher disparity. We're actually making progress here. So what do we do about it? So here's the part I want to get to. Well, first of all, it's not too late to apply for financial aid. Families may assume that, well, it's July, almost August. It must be too late to apply for fall. It is not. It's not too late to complete your FAFSA. It's not too late to get your application in. The FAFSA remains open all the way through next June 30th. So you can do the FAFSA at any point during the academic year. We're going to advise you to do it now because we want you to get access to your funding as early as possible, and we want to provide you that Amazon gift card that I'm talking about. But it's not too late to apply. It's also not too late to apply for fall admission. We know that some students may have been so put off by this process this year that they've just sort of said, I'm not even going to bother. Remember that the number of community colleges, and in Florida, our state colleges, actually have admission even running now. So it's not too late to apply for admission into some of our state and community colleges for the fall. If you've given up on fall, it's not too late to apply for spring admission. A lot of colleges offer spring admission programs, and you can apply for those now. And it's the same FAFSA that you'll complete now that will get you access to funding for that spring semester. And even if you're enrolled already, even if you just, enrolled but decided I'm just going to figure out the funding later, well, now is the time to complete that FAFSA. So what I'd like to do is actually, let me just change this for a second. Let's come over here. What we're going to do actually now is walk through the FAFSA itself. And what we're going to do is step through the pages of the form so you have a sense of how the form looks. And as I said, I'm going to highlight for you some of the things to watch out for. Feel free to ask questions as you go along. We are recording this workshop today so that we will send you a copy of the recording. So if you want to take notes, feel free to do so. If you just want to watch and know that you'll get a copy of the recording, and you can download a copy of this PowerPoint presentation as well on the website I'll show you at the end. You can feel free to do that. So first of all, I'm going to share with you this PowerPoint has about 300 slides. We are not going to go through every one. What I'm going to do is go through the most common option or scenario, which is where a dependent student invites their parent and goes through the application process together. So what I want to say is these are sample screenshots that will show what the FAFSA form looks like. As it says on the slide, the FAFSA form became available in December of 2023. Now, there are a couple of things that I want to highlight for you as you start to do your FAFSA. The first is you're going to need what's called an FSA ID. The student will need one, and a parent will need one. At least one parent, possibly two parents, will need an FSA ID. What is an FSA ID? It's a combination of a username and a password. So you know when you log into your bank account or you log into your credit card statement or you log into your frequent flyer account, whatever it might be, you need a combination of a username and a password to access your record. The same is true for the federal government and for the federal financial aid system for FAFSA. You need a FSA ID. What's important is that FSA ID is matched against databases the government has to prove that you're a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen, and to be able to retrieve your records from the IRS. It makes the FAFSA process much easier to complete this year than it's been for families in the past. What's important, though, is that you get your FSA ID at least 3 days before you try to do the FAFSA, because the government has to go through that database matching process. They have to compare the information you type in, your social security number, your date of birth, your last name, your first name, against their database and make sure that it matches. So you want to give that 3 days, 3 to 5 days, before you try to do the FAFSA itself. Otherwise, you may not be able to retrieve the information directly from the IRS. So I'll talk through I'll show you how do you access this, but you want to go ahead and request that FSA ID several days in advance. The other thing to note is that this application online is what's called a roles-based form. And you'll see this when we walk it through. What I mean by that is when a student logs in, they'll only see the section that pertains to them as a student. When a parent logs in, they'll see the section that pertains to them as a parent. But as a student, you can't see the parent information. As a parent, you can't see the student information. Each role has a different part of the application they can touch and see. Once a parent and a student both submit their information, then the entire FAFSA is sent off to the school for us to receive. The other thing that's important to understand is this concept of something called a contributor. A contributor, now, probably if you hear the word contributor and we weren't talking about FAFSA, that would probably mean to you money, right? When you're asked to contribute something, it's usually money. In this case, what contributor means is information. So a contributor is someone who provides information on the FAFSA. And that could be a parent, that could be the spouse of a parent, that could be the student's spouse, but it will always be the student. So at least one contributor, and likely for many of you, it'll be a student and a parent if you're a traditionally aged undergraduate student who's going to be completing information or contributing information on the form. If you're a contributor, you have to agree to share your information, and we'll look at that as we go through the application as well. Okay, so what I want to begin to look at then is the application itself. But before we do, one last point, which is that students have to invite their parents to contribute on their form. And so we'll look at that process as well, and how do you invite your family to be part of the application. So let's go through the application itself. So where do you go to start a FAFSA application? It's pretty easy. You go to studentaid.gov or www.studentaid.gov. And that is this page you're going to see here on the right. Once you land there, if you choose the FAFSA form, you'll see a landing page that looks like this. It invites you to start your FAFSA. You will click Start a New Form to begin your application. If you've already completed a form for the year, you'll click on Access Existing Form. But for most of you, if you're just starting a FAFSA now, you'll click on Start New Form. And when you do, you'll be taken to this login page. Now, remember I talked about the FSA ID. You can see in our sample case, this person has an FSA ID of a username and a password. They could also use their cell phone number and password or their email and password. If you have not yet registered for an FSA ID, you can click on Create an Account, and that will start the application process for an FSA ID. It's very easy, but again, that's the piece you want to do first to make sure you have your FSA ID before you begin the application itself. In this case, our sample student has already created an FSA ID, so she is logging in using her username and password. When she logs in, it says, how are you starting this FAFSA? Are you starting the FAFSA as a parent, or are you starting the FAFSA as a student? Remember, I said it's roles based. So Raya is the name of the student we're going to be looking at. Raya chooses, I am a student. So I am starting this form as a student. The next 4 screens are going to be videos that walk the student and walk you through what to expect through the FAFSA. And the very first page starts just an onboarding video to explain what the FAFSA is, why you might be completing it, etc. The second page gives you information about contributors. Remember, I said contributors are those people who provide information, and it walks through a video about contributors, tells you what documents you might need. The third page talks about what to expect when you complete the application, how much time it will take. It says it could take an hour. What I find is it takes much less time than that to complete the form, but they warn you about the possibility of an hour. I will say when I did my application, and I did, it took about 10 minutes. Now, granted, I have a lot more experience with this, and it went through pretty quickly, but even so, I've heard that families, it's taking 15 to 20 minutes for them to complete a FAFSA if everything goes well. Again, which is why we're going through this today to give you that information and background so everything will go well. The last one tells you what happens after you submit your FAFSA, what's next, and it talks to you about when the school gets it, how long it will take, how to log back in and make corrections. So those 4 videos are the first screens the student will see. Once you've gone through those 4 videos, it will then, and you don't have to watch them if you don't want to, but they're there for you. It will then provide you with a copy of basic information confirming that you are who you are, and it gives you the opportunity to review this information. This is all information that you will have provided when you created your FSA ID, but it gives you an opportunity to check it. And if, for example, your address has changed, or you mistyped your email address or your cell phone number, you can update all of that. And you can update it by using your account settings on studentaid.gov. Now, what I'm going to show you as we go through, a lot of the screens are going to be the same when the student looks at them, and then later when a parent looks at them. So we're going to move fairly quickly through the parent side because you'll see much of the information is exactly identical. So what I want to do for you as we go through now is highlight that, but also let you know, that we're going to move quickly through the parent side of it when we get there because there won't be much different between them. Okay, so let's move on to the next page then. So the next page, and this is the one that gives students a lot of the first sort of major confusion or first major question, and it comes to state of legal residence. So let's talk about this for a second. So if a student is born in a state and has lived there all their life, their state of legal residence is that state. So if you, for example, live in Massachusetts, you were born in Massachusetts, that is your state of legal residence, and the date you became a resident of Massachusetts is the day you were born. So a lot of students don't really know what this means. What it means is, when did you become a legal resident of that state? If you were born in the state, date of birth. If not, right, it's when you moved to the state. So if you were born in Massachusetts but moved to Florida 5 years ago, it's the day you moved to Florida, or the month and year you moved to Florida, that you would put in there as the legal residence date. Now, where this gets a little confusing is, if you're a parent, what do you put? So, as if you're a parent, it's asking about mom and dad's date of legal residence. You're going to put the longest, farthest to go date, the one that is farthest in the past. So, if mom moved to Florida in 97 and dad moved to Florida in 2000, you would use the 1997 date. Does it all really matter? Well, here's what they're looking for here. Many states have an amount of time for which you have to have lived in the state to qualify for their state scholarship or for their in-state tuition residency or something like that. In the state of Florida, it's a year. So you have to have lived in Florida for a year before the student starts attending college to qualify for those programs. So really, that's what they're asking. Now, different states have different rules. I believe in Massachusetts it's 3 years. Other states may have different rules. As long as it's 5 or more years in the past, generally, you're not going to have to worry about it. But that's why the question is there, is to make sure that parents and students have a residency in the state in which they're going to qualify for financial aid. The next page provides information about consent, and we're going to show you two sections of it. Here's the first section, here's the second section. Let's talk about consent. So anyone who's providing information on the application as a contributor is required to provide consent. All the consent means is that you're consenting to having your information checked against the IRS database, and if the information matches, to have the IRS information brought over to the application. Consent is not optional for the FAFSA. So if you decide not to give consent, either you decide that, or if you're a student, your parent decides that, then what will happen is that you cannot receive federal financial aid as a result. Consent is required to receive federal financial aid for anyone who's on the application. So if a student provides consent but their parent does not, that student will not receive federal financial aid. So you can see the blue box here says approve. If you were to click decline, then you'll go through it. It will warn you about this. It will say you're going to not receive financial aid if you choose decline. It'll allow you to continue, but it will tell you that that is not a great choice. So just letting you know that that information is here. Again, we'll see this as well on the parent side, but it is there on the student side. So now we're going to step into the main application itself. And the application, as you'll see, has multiple sections. So we're going to start with a section called Your Personal Circumstances. And again, this is for Raya Tran, who's our applicant. We're going to move into her personal circumstance situation. You can see on the top of the page, there are 5 sections for the FAFSA. So for the student side of the form, we're going to start with personal circumstances, which is section 1. The very first question that's asked is student marital status. Now, let me identify. Again, remember I said, I don't think I've said this yet, but this FAFSA is the same application that be used by a 17-year-old who's just going off to college for the first time. It's the same application that a 50-something-year-old would complete if they were going off to get a master's or a PhD, or maybe a 30-something going off to get their MD. Any applicant for federal financial aid is going to use this same application form. So up to this point, nothing is different, right? So that's why you'll see all of these different marital statuses. It could be that this would be me doing my application form, and I am married, so I would choose married. Well, in Raya's case, she's choosing single. And again, this is about the student, so she's choosing single and clicking next. What we're doing in this first section is we're trying to determine if you're a dependent or independent student. And I want to define what that means for you. So dependent student means that we need your parents' information. Independent students means that we don't. So if you're dependent, we're going to need parent information. If you're independent, you will file the application just on your income and your information alone. So by being single, Raya moves on to the dependent questions. And you'll see all these questions are really designed to get at, are you dependent or independent? The next section says, what year are you going to be in college? Well, Raya is going to be your first year student. First years, second years, other undergraduates are dependent unless there are other situations that make them independent. Master students or graduate students of any type are automatically independent. So you'll see that that question is here. This is another one that students get confused by. It says, when you start the 24-25 school year, will you already have your first bachelor's degree? Just a reminder that students graduating high school do not have their bachelor's degree. When they start college, they have their high school diploma, but not a bachelor's degree. If you say yes, then you've automatically turned down a number of financial aid programs. You want to make sure to say no, unless you're going back for something after your bachelor's. But again, in most cases for high school students, that's going to be a no. The next question or page asks you to identify particular circumstances that would make you independent. So, number one, are you, and I'll go through these, but if you answer yes to any of these, you're automatically independent. So, number one, are you currently on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces? Number two, are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? Number three, do you have kids of your own who live with you and for whom you provide more than half of their support? Number four, are you an orphan or a ward of the court? Number five, that's the ward of the court. Number six, are you in foster care or were you in foster care? Are you an emancipated minor or are you in legal guardianship with a legal guardian, someone other than your parents? If any of those are true, the student is automatically considered independent. If all of those are no, as it was with Raya, and you can see, by the way, if I go back on this, you can see that she clicked the page or she clicked the box that said none of these apply. But if something did apply, right, then it would make you independent. If none of these apply, the next question will say, are you homeless? Are you unaccompanied and either homeless or self supporting and at risk of being homeless? And just to clarify, this means the student themselves is without their parents, living on their own, and is homeless or at risk of homelessness. If that is true, the next question would actually ask you to provide documentation of that, either by saying, I live in a shelter, or I'll meet with a financial aid officer and describe my circumstance, or I have a letter from a McKinsey-Vento coordinator. It will tell you more information. But in Raya's case, she's answered no. So up to this point, Raya is a dependent student, right? The next page says, given all of this, are there unusual circumstances that we might want to be aware of that will make a difference for you? So, for example, did you leave home because there was an abusive situation? Are you a victim of human trafficking? Are you estranged from your parents? Are your parents incarcerated? Other information. So again, Ryan answers no. But if you are in an unusual circumstance or you're working with a student who is, you could answer yes to this and your parents' information would not be required. Now, if you answer yes on this page, you will have to provide, more than likely, documentation to your college to document why it is that you're saying yes. And that documentation could include a third-party letter from either a counselor or a therapist or a lawyer or a police report or something to show why you've answered yes to this question. But every college is going to be the one you're going to work with, and each college may have different rules or requirements for how to document that circumstance. In Raya's case, she said no. This next question is a question that caused much confusion this year. And again, I want to highlight this for you. So they've actually changed the wording on this question as well. The question asks direct unsubsidized loan only. So all of that said, let's say a parent just refuses to provide information to their student and says, I'm not going to pay for college, and therefore I'm not going to file the form with you. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but let's say they say that, right? What do you do? What does the student do? Well, the student has an option. They can, on this question, say, yes, my parents are unwilling to provide their information. If they do that, all they will receive is an unsubsidized loan. It's a student loan for a very small amount that the student will be able to borrow, but they won't receive any other financial aid. So if that is the case, there is an option to say yes here and move on without requiring parents' information. But in most cases, most students are going to say no. Now, remember, I said let's come back to that. If a parent is concerned because either they can't afford to pay for college or they're not supporting their student financially, remember that filling out the FAFSA doesn't obligate the parent to do anything in terms of paying college bills. All it does is says, I'm giving you my information so you can determine whether or not I'm eligible for financial aid. It does nothing in terms of requiring a parent to pay. So sometimes I'll hear from parents that say, I don't want to fill out the FAFSA. And when I'll ask why, the answer will be either A, I don't think I'll qualify. Well, how do you know that? B, right, I'm not going to pay for college because I can't afford it. Well, that's what the FAFSA is for, is to determine whether you can afford something or not. And it doesn't require payment. It's really just, it's free, right? It's an application to determine eligibility for aid. So often, once I explain that, parents will provide their information. And a reminder that the information parent is providing is already in the government database. It's usually with the IRS. So if a parent files their IRS form, it's just linking the information over. Okay, so now we've determined Raya is a dependent student. So you can see we've moved to the second section of the application, which is the demographic information. So we're going to ask Raya some questions. We're almost done. We've got one section first, which is about her parents. But we have determined she is a dependent student. So, who are parents for the purposes of the FAFSA? So, for this question, what it means is a student's biological or adoptive parent. And it asks three questions. And we'll only see one of them here because Raya is in a pretty simple situation, but I'll go through all of them with you. And this will help determine which parent is the parent that has to fill out the FAFSA with the student, which parent or parents. So, the first question asks, are the parents married to each other? Yes or no? If your parents are married, right, and you're Raya, then both mom and dad, or dad or mom and mom, will complete the application with Raya, right? If your parents are married to each other, then it's those parents who will complete the application. But let's say Raya had answered, no, my parents are not married to each other. What would the next question be? On that same page, the next question would ask, are your parents unmarried and living together? So if parents are unmarried but choose to live together, they still want information from both parents because that is considered a household. Will want income information on both parents. If the answer to that question is no, so no, my parents aren't married, no, my parents aren't unmarried and living together, the next question we'll ask the student will ask Raya to determine which of her two parents provided more financial support over the last 12 months. And it leaves that answer to the student to decide. So it will ask which parent provided more financial support to you. That means paid your housing, paid your meals, paid your expenses. Raya has to determine which of her two parents that is, and that is the parent with whom she will file the application. Now, notice it doesn't ask who claimed you on their tax return. It doesn't ask who you live with. It asks who pays more. So let me give you an example. So let's say my wife and I, we get married, we have a kid, we then divorce. The kid lives with me, but my wife pays me child support because that child support is used to provide funding for my child's housing, my child's meals. Depending upon the amount of the child support, that may be more than half of the student's support. If that's true, then that student would choose mom as the person who provides more than half of the support. Now, what happens if neither parent provides support or the amount of support they provide is exactly equal? In that situation, the student is told, choose the parent who has the greater income and assets. But only then, really, does it matter about income and assets. Up to this point, it's been about who provides more support. Now, once you pick the parent, either mom or dad, then at that point, the question becomes, is that parent remarried? And if so, include that remarried spouse's information as well. So let me go through this. So Rebecca and I, my wife and I, we got married, we had a kid, we divorce, the child lives with me, mom provides more support, mom is remarried, In that situation, it would be mom and mom's new spouse who would complete the FAFSA, even though the child is living with me, right? So that would be how that situation plays out. If you have questions about your personal circumstance, feel free to ask about it in the Q&A. But again, I wanted to review that with you so you had a sense of how this works. Once you've identified what parent you're going to complete the application with or in partnership with, then it asks you to invite the parent to the FAFSA form. And there are a couple things I want to highlight on this page for your attention. So, number one, it asks you to list the name, the date of birth, and the social security number of the parent. Now, most students probably, hopefully, know their parent's legal name. But many students may not have their parents' date of birth handy, and I'm sure most students don't have their parents' social security number at their disposal. But it's important that they type in the correct social security number for their parent. Um, so what's important as students are completing their FAFSA is that parents share their social security number with them so that they're able to type in the right information. What we did notice, what Federal Student Aid noticed, is that parents actually or students, when they completed this form, got to this question of social security number, realized they didn't have their parents' social security number, and chose this box that says, my parent doesn't have an SSN. That is incorrect. They should not do that. If they choose my parent doesn't have an SSN, that's doing something completely different. And that may be true, right? If your parent doesn't have an SSN, feel free to click that. But if your parent legitimately does, you need to provide the real number, not choose my parent doesn't have an SSN. So again, be careful on this page. The other thing I'll say is you want to make sure that your name as entered or the name as entered matches the parent's legal name. And this may be an issue specifically for families where there's a hyphenated name, or if it's a Hispanic family where the name might be Garcia de Ramon. And some documents might say Garcia, some documents might say Ramon. You want to make sure you use whatever is on your legal documents, like your social security card or your tax return, as the right name to provide. Also, email address. So again, make sure the email address is typed in here correctly. Once you click send invite, the parent will then get an invite from FAFSA, and I'll show you what that looks like in a bit, that parent invitation. And that parent information invitation will give the parent access to be able to start hearing or filling out the financial aid application. So it is that invite that will give them information and access. Okay, so let's move on. So we've just completed the first section, right? Now we're going to move to the demographics section, section 2 of the application. You can see up here we're done with personal circumstances. We're moving on to demographics. So demographics, these are optional questions. The very first question asks the student's gender. Student can answer this question or it can say prefer not to answer. This has nothing to do with the student's eligibility for financial aid, but it's really just for tracking purposes on the department's end. As well, they're asked to describe race and ethnicity. Again, the student can choose not to answer on any of those questions. The next question, though, is very important. It asks for the student's citizenship status. So, to remind us, to qualify for federal financial aid, you must be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen. So, U.S. citizen is pretty clear. What is an eligible non-citizen? So, an eligible non-citizen is someone who probably has their green card, that's one type, or is a permanent resident. Someone who might be here on a refugee or asylee status, or there are other types of conditions. They might be a Ukrainian refugee or a Haitian refugee. There are other conditions that will qualify someone as an eligible non-citizen. If you're not clear about that and whether you might qualify for aid or not, you can do a search for FAFSA, eligible non-citizen, on a search tool like Google, and it will come up and tell you what the conditions and requirements are. Again, keep in mind the student has to be a U.S. citizen. Their parents do not have to be to qualify for federal financial aid. So, for example, Right? Let's say a student was born in the US, but their parents were here visiting on a visitor's visa. If that's the case, the student might be a US citizen, parents might not be, but they will still qualify. Remember, I said a student either has to be a US citizen or eligible non-citizen to qualify for financial aid. The next question asks about parents' education status. This is not used for aid, it's really just used for tracking purposes. Some programs may have a first generation benefit, but federal financial aid does not. So, but it's really just for tracking information. The next page asks if your parent was killed in the line of duty, either while they were serving as a member of the U.S. Armed Forces after 9/11, or if they were performing an official duty as a public safety officer. If that is true, there are certain benefits that accrue to those students in terms of Pell Grant. And if that's true, the student would answer yes and be prepared to provide documentation to the college of the circumstances of their parent's death. But in Raya's case, she's answered no. Now we're going to ask questions about high school completion. So, to receive federal financial aid, you have to have received a high school diploma or its equivalent. And so it's asking the student to identify how she's received her high school diploma or equivalent. She graduated from high school with a high school diploma, but if you got a GED, you could choose that. If you were homeschooled, you could choose that as appropriate. Because she indicated she got a high school diploma, it's now going to ask her what high school did she graduate or will she graduate from. There's a search bar. She's in New York. She looks up the name of the school and she finds it and chooses it and confirms it. Now we're to the third section of the form, and this is going to move really quickly, the finances section. You might think this would be one of the most complicated sections, but because remember, I said much of the information is coming directly from the IRS. It actually is a very easy section. You'll see. There are really only three questions about your income and a couple of questions about your assets. And I'm going to go through these questions. Remember, I said at the start, these questions are going to repeat when it comes time to the parent side of the application. So I'm going to talk about them now with really both parent and student in mind. The first question asks about a pension rollover into an IRA or into another qualified plan. So again, in most situations, students are not going to have this. Parents probably aren't going to have this. But let's say, and I should highlight, this is looking at your 2022 tax information. So the FAFSA year 24-25 looks at your 2022 taxes. What this is asking is in 2022, did you move money from one retirement account to another retirement account? If you did, that money might have shown up on your tax return as income even though it immediately moved into another retirement account. And so this is giving you an opportunity to say, hey, that wasn't really income. That was just money moving from one place to another. As I said, most families probably don't have this. Most students definitely won't have this, but most parents probably won't as well. So in Raya's case, she's answered zero. The next question asks, what was the amount of college grants, scholarships, or AmeriCorps benefits that you reported as income to the IRS? Well, let's talk about that for a second. Again, most students are going to answer zero, most parents too. It is unusual, but sometimes the scholarship or grant assistance you might get to go to college might be higher than the amount of tuition or required fees, and that excess portion might be taxable. If that is the case and you had to report that as income and therefore pay taxes on it, this allows you to report that here so you're not double penalized for that. Again, it's highly unlikely, especially as a new student, that you'd have that or that parents would have that, but the question is there just in case that is true. The third question here asks about foreign earned income. So again, this is probably unlikely for most families and definitely for most students, but let's explain what that is and why this might pertain. So if you as a parent or if you as a student had income that you earned in a foreign country. So I'll give you an example. I'm a US citizen. I live in the US, but this year I worked abroad for a company on a temporary assignment. I earned my income while I was living in Bangladesh. And because of that, right, that earned income was earned abroad. I paid taxes in Bangladesh to the Bangladeshi tax authority because that income was earned there. Well, the US government doesn't penalize you for that when it comes to your taxes in the United States because you already pay taxes on that abroad. So you get what's called a foreign earned income exclusion. But for the purposes of FAFSA, we want you to show us how much that money was because we do need to add it back because it was truly part of your income. It won't show up on your IRS form, or it will, but it'll be a deduction. But we want to add it back here. So again, most of you aren't going to have any of these circumstances. Certainly, most students won't. So you're just going to answer zero and click next. This is a question or questions that may have more relevance for most of you, and it's assets. And again, you're going to see them on the student side and also on the parent side. So I'll talk about them for both now. First of all, the biggest asset that most families have that is nowhere on this form is home. If you own your home, home is not an asset you report on the FAFSA at all. It's not required to be reported unless it's a multifamily home. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But for most families, home is not going to be reported on the FAFSA at all. The other asset that many families have that is not reported is the total amount of their retirement accounts. So if you have a 401k or a 403b or a SEP program, any of those specifically designated retirement accounts, you do not report them as assets on the FAFSA. What does get reported? Well, first of all, the first line asks for cash, savings, and checking accounts. So your bank accounts gets reported. Second one asks about the value and net worth, really, of businesses and investment farms. Again, most students are not going to have a business. Most students are not going to have an investment farm. Parents might. What this is asking for is what assets is held, what assets are held in that company, and if you could sell them, what would the value of them be? That might be computers, that might be a building if the business owns a building, it might be the inventory, but it asks you to estimate the value of that. Again, unless you're a business owner, you're not going to have an asset to put here. Many families are just going to answer zero to that question. If you have an investment farm, meaning you don't live on your farm, but you own a farm that you're using as an investment, you'd report that value here as well. And then the third section asks about other investments, including real estate. So this might be a second property, or this might be a money market account, or this might be stocks that you own, not in your retirement plan, but other stocks that you own. You'd report the value here. Again, for Raya, it's a zero. You can see Raya has some small amount in cash and savings and checking, but nothing in the others. But again, parents also are asked these questions. So we'll see if Raya's mom has anything that she reports. So that's it for finances. Again, we're moving pretty quickly through the form. We're now to where you select the colleges you want to report your information to. You can choose up to 20 colleges on the application, and you can search for them by name and by state, or you'll see this option here that says search by school code. Each individual school has a 6-digit school code that they can provide you, and you can search for the college that way as well. That's probably safer if it's a common name like Wesleyan. There are a lot of Wesleyans in the country. You want to make sure it's Texas Wesleyan versus Wesleyan College versus Wesleyan University. If you get the school code, you'll have the exact right information. But as you can see, you can list up to 20 colleges on the application, and all you do is find them, and now they're included. A word of advice about colleges: you should put a college on the FAFSA even if you haven't yet applied for admission, even if you haven't yet been accepted. Basically, the choosing the college on the FAFSA just gets the information to them in case you then later apply for admission or later get accepted. You don't have to wait until you're accepted to do the FAFSA, but that information is available for you and there. So now we're just to the review section. Now, another common mistake is students will get to this page and say, I'm done, and close their browser. They are not done. You have to sign the application, really important. And I'll show you how that happens as you go. You can see the signature box here is grayed out because it has not been done yet. All this other information has been completed. If you made a mistake, you want to correct something, you can expand it and click on it and go to that question. It also identifies for you who that has been named as a contributor. And again, the information's been shared with Alcina Tran, who is Raya's mother. So she is the person who information was shared with and when. And finally, the student has to sign the application, check the box, and click sign. And once they've done that, that will then take them to a kind of confirmation screen that says, thanks, you're done with your section. And now let's talk about what's next. And that would be the parents section. So I want to stop here and just say for a moment what parent has to complete the form. We talked about in divorce separated situations, but it's also important to talk about which parent has to be a contributor. And what's important here is to understand whose tax record and how they have a tax record with the IRS. So for every tax record of the IRS, you have to have a contributor. So in Raya's case, if her mom and dad filed married filing jointly, they filed one tax record together, they have one IRS form, then only one of them has to be a contributor because once you pull one person's information, it's all part of one tax record. Dad's information will be pulled with mom's information. So only one of them has to be a contributor. But let's say mom and dad file taxes separately. So mom files married filing separately, dad files as head of household. If that were the case, right, then both parents would have to be contributors because we're going to pull two different IRS records. So for every IRS record, there has to be a contributor. What if neither parent files a tax return? Well, they still both have to be a contributor. So the process is going to check with the IRS to see if there's a tax return present. And as a result, if a parent doesn't file a tax return, they need to be a contributor so that the information in the process can go and identify that they don't have a tax return. So let's say mom files a tax return, but dad doesn't, then both have to be a contributor. Or mom doesn't file the tax return and dad doesn't. Both have to be a contributor. Both have to complete the FAFSA. The only time it can only be one parent is if mom or dad and dad, or mom and mom file jointly together. And in that situation, only one parent has to serve as a contributor on the FAFSA form. So here is an example of what mom is going to get. This is an example of that email. Remember, I said earlier when Raya clicked invite my parent, that Raya's mom would get an email. This is what the email looks like. It comes from Federal Student Aid. It says help complete and the name of your student, their form, and it invites you to click on the link and get started. Now, I know I said this presentation is about an hour 15. We're about 15 minutes away from the end. You might think, well, we're just starting the parent section. That's going to be a lot, isn't it? No, because much of what we've already covered, you'll see again as we go through the parent section. So you'll see in this situation, right, the parent logs in. We talked about the login screen before that identifies that you're doing this for Raya Tran. Are you sure you want to do it? And now finally continue to let you know. And you'll see again, much of this is going to be repeat. So the same four videos we talked about before, the same confirmation page, the same information about consent. And now we move to parent demographics. So mom is going to be asked, what is her marital status? Is she married? Is she divorced? Is she separated? Is she remarried? Unmarried and both parents living together. Parents are asked about their state of legal residence. Remember, I told you about this before. And that's it. So we move now to finances. So again, we went through finances before. There are a couple of new questions here I just want to highlight for you. The first one asks, did anyone in your family receive federal benefits? This is to see if you qualify for a simple or simplified needs test on the back end. So if a parent or student receives one of these benefits, either federal housing assistance, free or reduced lunch, Medicare, Medicaid, SNAP, etc., you can see the list of the programs here. If that is true, they would check one of the above. In Raya's case, she clicks none. Mom clicks none. It asks about filing status. Did your parents file a 2022 IRS form 1040 or 1040 NR? If so, NR for non-resident. If so, they click yes. If not, they would click no, and it would know that it needs to go through and look for non-filing information, or maybe the parent lives abroad and filed a foreign tax return. So it gives you the specificity or the answers you can provide if you click no. The next question says, did you or will you file a 2022 joint tax return with your current spouse? The reason that's important is, let's say you've gotten divorced as a parent since 2022, or maybe you're now widowed, God forbid, someone passed away. If that's the case, if you click on no, it will give you an opportunity to hand enter your information if it's different. But in most cases, you're going to click yes, and it's just going to automatically pull over that IRS information. If you do click no, again, it will give you the chance to hand enter information otherwise. The next question asks about family size. It gives you an opportunity, if your family size has changed since you filed your IRS form, to be able to update it. So again, for example, let's say when you filed the IRS form in 2022, there were two kids plus the two parents, but now you have a new baby, right? You've had a bonus baby, right? And in that case, you need to add another member to the family. That is what Raya's family is doing here. Four was on the tax return, but they're adding another one, another person, and so now we're up to five. Well, actually, backing up, in her case, it was three on the tax return. She added a baby to make it four. Out of the four people in the family, how many will be in college? This question is not used for anything other than information. It used to be that number in college mattered on the FAFSA. It's just really to help colleges and scholarship providers understand how many in the family are attending college at the same time. And now we're to the tax information. Again, we went through most of this before. There's just one question I want to highlight for you that is different, and that is this question about, did the parent receive an earned income credit? Earned income credit is a credit provided to the lowest wage earning families who have children, and it's a credit that can be refunded based on your tax liability. If you have it, you would probably know that. It would be on your tax return. If you're not clear, if you click again on any of these screens, if you click the little I button, it will tell you where to look. But in her case, she has said no. The other three questions are exactly the same as the ones we saw on the student financial questions. Now we're to parent assets. Again, as I said, parent assets are much the same. There is one new question that asks annual child support received. So if you as a parent receive child support, it asks you to demonstrate or detail how much you received in the last calendar year, the last complete calendar year. Raya's parents are not divorced, so the answer is zero. But in your case, if you did receive child support, you're going to put in, at this point, the information on how much child support was received in 2023, because that is the last complete calendar year for right now. It asks to identify who the other parent is. In this case, there's no invitation needed because they have filed jointly. So it's going to be one tax record. And then Raya's parent is asked to review and sign her section. So again, she clicks I agree, she clicks sign, and she is now done with her section. It moved fairly quickly through. And from there, the student's going to get an email that confirms that they have indeed finished the FAFSA. That email is really important for our process because that is how you're going to document that you've completed a FAFSA, and you're going to submit a copy of that email to get your $20 Amazon gift card, which I will show you how to do in just a moment. So what I want to do now is I want to actually share with you, um, again, the form itself and show you where you can go to see that information. So if you go over here to, and we'll send this to you, we'll send you a link to the recording today, a link to the website with the information and a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, and a link to this form. This form is how you will communicate that you've completed your FAFSA. And on the form, you will see that you can enter your name, your address, your email address rather, your phone number, your race, ethnicity, the name of the high school you attended, and you can upload a copy of that document that proves you've completed your form. The document, again, will just have basic information for you. It will show you, in fact, that the form has been completed. Um, and again, you'll see that because that will be sent to you in the form of an email from the Department of Education. It is that email you want to send a copy of to us. And the email looks like this. It says, "We received your free application for federal student aid," and it tells you when the submission deadline is or was, when you submitted it, gives you some other information. This form is up and running until August 15th. We want to make sure you complete and submit your FAFSA by August 15th. That is our deadline to make sure we get this turned around and the funding provided back to you. So please make sure to complete your FAFSA by August 15th. Now, just a couple of other things, and then we will begin to wrap this up. If you want a copy of the information we've provided today, if you go to familyfafsa.com, which is the information that will bring you to this page, if you go to the bottom of the page, you will see here is the link to the PowerPoint presentation we've completed today. If I click on that link, that will take me to a website that has both a PowerPoint version and a PDF version if I want to be able to download and review it. Also, you will see on this page, we are doing one more of these events on August 6th. So if you have family members who couldn't be here today, or you want to let people know about it, August 6th is our last event. And finally, just to remind you, here is that studentaid.gov webpage. And again, from the webpage, you can see FAFSA form. That is where you can complete the FAFSA form. Or if you need to create an account, create and get an FSA ID, you will do that by clicking on Create Account. Once you have an account, that account is yours for your lifetime. So that is true. You'll use that account when you apply for FAFSA next year. You'll use that account when you do your student loan information or other information. It is the same information. If I click on FAFSA form, you can see again, we're back to the page that I started with Start a New FAFSA form. So with that, I will stop here. It is 12:04. We're a couple minutes early, so I'll see if there are any questions or comments that any of my panelists would like to make. And if you do have any questions, again, feel free to type them in the Q&A. We are here to help if you have questions with information that I've raised today. Okay. So again, we will get you a copy of the recording for today once it's available. I want to thank you all for spending time with us today. I hope this information was helpful. We'll get you an email that links to the page for you to submit your FAFSA proof and receive your $20 Amazon gift card. Thank you again for being part of our workshop today. We hope this was helpful for you. Have a great day.